Hi, and welcome back to Rose Connections. My name is Janet Rose, and every month I cover three main topics that help us become more heart-centered leaders. I have a vision for creating a more loving, sustainable, and just world that I hope you are watching because you share in that vision. And so this is the framework that I have for being a heart-centered leader. I consider myself a heart-centered leader. I consider you a heart-centered leader. And so even if you have never been told a day in your life that you have leadership potential, I see that potential in you. I know at some point in your life, you're going to be asked to step up and you're going to be asked to help lead us to a better world. And so that's why you're watching this, hopefully, is to learn some practical ways to do that, to change your perspective, to challenge your viewpoint. And so specifically today with Relationship Reboot is all about challenging our perspectives about how we relate to other people. And today's topic is about the tower. It's piggybacking onto a topic that I covered last month. So there's going to be a link below for you to get to that so you can get caught up on what I mean by the tower. But just big hint, if you are a fan of tarot in any way, the tower card, you're going to understand that imagery pretty well. But I think almost all of us, even if we can't relate to that symbolism that is present in the tarot decks, I think almost all of us can relate to this idea of a wrecking ball coming through our relationships and just scattering everything everywhere, causing all this destruction, causing, big breakdowns. I think some of the hardest breakdowns that we have as individuals, as human beings, is when our relationships break down. So today specifically, I really want to zero in on romantic relationships in particular. Relationship Reboot applies to any type of relationship, even those that we have with the strangers that we meet in our lives, the folks that we go to school with or work with, anything like that. But today I want to focus on those romantic relationships, because when we have a wrecking ball come through, it is challenging all of those limiting beliefs that kept us in this sort of unsustainable tower all this time. A wrecking ball comes through after you've already been served with notice, after you've already been told to get out. And if you think about the tarot journey, which I actually think that there are some really wonderful life lessons in that. I think there's something very relatable for everyone in that journey, the Fool's journey. The fool starts his journey completely innocent and naive and willing to step off a cliff into the unknown because he just believes that much in the universe and this new adventure that he's taking. As the fool continues to journey, he will encounter entities like the Lovers or the Chariot. He's going to also encounter the Hanged Man, who is going to ask him to change his perspective by looking at things from a new point of view. He's also going to encounter the Devil, who's going to tempt him to give in to his worst patterns. He's going to encounter the Death card that is going to say, you need to let go of some stuff. There's a natural process and cycle to life. So by the time he gets to the Tower card, he has been put on notice several times already. Changes need to happen in your life. Changes need to happen in this relationship. There's something about this relationship that is not sustainable anymore the way that it is. And usually when we see that relationship is not sustainable, a lot of it has to do with the presumptions, the expectations versus the reality of who we really are, where we see a conflict, we see a misalignment between what is expected of us in the relationship, what has been presumed about those expectations or us as individuals, as well as then the actual lived reality of who we really are, our authentic selves. When these things are out of alignment, the structure will end up needing to come down, needing to be fixed at some point or another. It is not going to be sustainable. Now, let me just share with you that I was a divorce mediator for 5 years. So I got to see these wrecking balls happen in real time. I got to see the outcome of what happens when these things come through people's lives and cause this wreckage. And they're picking up the pieces. Our temptation is to pick up the pieces and create exactly the same kind of structure that we did before, to choose the same kind of partner, or to just, get into any relationship whatsoever, because the structure of a relationship, we've gotten so used to having that being without it almost feels too vulnerable. But what happens is we don't always go through that critical examination of looking at all that wreckage. And it's traumatic. I'm not trying to make light of the fact that some of these relationships end in truly traumatic ways. And sometimes in truly dangerous ways too. But what I am saying is that once we are through the end of that relationship and we're looking at all that's left behind, this is a wonderful time for us to examine that dichotomy, that alignment or misalignment between what was expected of us, what we presumed, and then our lived reality, our authenticity. For example, your relationship might have been built on an expectation of monogamy. That is wonderful. Lots of people have wonderfully successful monogamous relationships. It can be done. I personally am polyamorous, so, but I was monogamous in some relationships at some point in my life, so I have some experience with it. But one of the things that I found, especially as I was going through my own marriage prep when we were getting married, is that those expectations of monogamy are not always very well laid out. They're not always communicated. They're not always fleshed out with the kind of detail and decision-making priority that we place on it. We place a very high value on sexual exclusivity in monogamy, for example, but we don't always make it clear where that line is. For example, in some people's relationships, their monogamy extends to you shall not even look at anybody else. Whereas other people's expectations of monogamy are, you'll only be married to me, but you can play with other people if you want. So obviously those are two very, very, very different things. If you have a person who is in this relationship of thou shalt not ever look at others, and who has that as a core need in their lives, they're not going to always mix well with the person whose expectation of monogamy is, so long as I only, go to bed with or sleep in the presence of this one other person. Or I will, I can kiss everybody I want. I just can't have sex with anyone else. Those two things are not going to be very compatible. The problem is that these two people might end up coming together and never discussing what the expectations of their monogamy are. And so then you wind up in these situations where there's a lot of unspoken expectations and a lot of presumptions and a lot of assumptions about who someone is. How often are we in relationship with someone and they're actually in a relationship with who they think we are rather than the reality of who we are? For example, someone might be in a relationship, a romantic relationship with someone who is closeted, who is actually gay, or is having some gender identity questioning that's going on in their lives. And so how often are those individuals who are dealing with that closeted nature of their lives, how honest are they able to be with their partners? Are their partners making assumptions on them and placing expectations on them that don't really match their reality? How do those expectations even serve us? And whoever said that that was the way it had to be done? What's interesting is, that monogamy example, for example, the monogamy example, in that situation where you have two very different lines that are being drawn, the only way to really negotiate that is to literally sit and negotiate that and say, this is what I expect in a relationship. This is what I expect in a relationship. Where is that area that we can meet? Or are those things deal breakers for us? Very often, I don't think we engage holistically in that conversation. Another area where I see these relationships break down is expectations over how you're going to raise kids together. Like, for example, what religion they're going to be raised if you're in a mixed faith household. Some people actually literally don't have that conversation. And it's one of the saddest things that I see, because these are people that could really be wonderful together if they had just been honest from the beginning, if they had not allowed things to accumulate via presumption. So when a wrecking ball comes through, it comes through all of those presumptions, all of those expectations, and all of those missed opportunities to really assert ourselves and assert our needs. And it forces us to ask where we've been honest with ourselves and with others. It forces us to understand whether those structures are really meeting our needs or not. And just like in my last video, and I talked about the tendency of people to just replace one structure with another, we have that temptation to do that in our relationships as well. When these wrecking balls come through, we might actually swing the pendulum completely the other way and go with that bad boy, image instead of the straight, clean cut, all American type that we've been dating. We might swing the pendulum back and forth a little bit. And that's actually okay. And that's normal, because when those wrecking balls come through, we really should be sitting with that rubble a little bit and figuring out, oh God, there were some racist expectations that were there. Okay, I'm going to push those aside. I'm not going to integrate that into what I do next. But it's also that wonderful opportunity for us to really sit with ourselves and ask ourselves what we need and what is it that we're truly looking for? What is it that's really going to help us? Some of the things that have stopped are authentic connections that get revealed in these wrecking ball moments. Are not only just the stereotypes that I mentioned, or the assumptions that I mentioned, but also stereotypes. How often do we have racialized stereotypes or gendered stereotypes that we are imposing on our partners, or that were imposed upon us by our partners? For example, a racial stereotype of Latino women is that we are feisty and fiery. But there's also this kind of Madonna horror complex going on with us too. I have definitely been subjected to those types of assumptions and stereotypes in my own relationships in the past. How many of us are also reenacting just old family patterns? I remember once a mediation between a young father and mother. They were trying to negotiate how they were going to co-parent in the future. And he really wanted to be able to offer their daughter a shared birthday party where everyone can come together. And she was super, super resistant about that. She really did not want that. And so as we did some questioning, it came down to the fact that she thought that she was going to be disloyal to her mother, who went through a similarly bad breakup and bad divorce. She felt a need, an obligation to punish this man so that she could kind of give a voice to what her mom wasn't able to accomplish in her own divorce. And so how many of us are reliving old family patterns like that, where we are engaging in this warfare just because it's what's tradition? It's or because we want to honor someone else that we loved and the struggle and the injustice that they faced. How many of us participate in relationships that magnify our shame or guilt? How many of us are carrying shame and guilt into our relationships? Maybe it's shame over watching porn. Maybe it's guilt for having, had some controlling tendencies in your last relationship because you were being lied to. How much of it is accumulated from our prior relationships. When we have these wrecking balls come through, that's a really wonderful time to get rid of all that junk that other people have left behind, that other people told us we should feel about ourselves. How many of us are also subjected to disinformation and ignorance within our relationships? And by that, when I say disinformation or ignorance, it is everything from, a very deliberate, keeping information from someone, like not telling them about big purchases that you made. There's a lot of financial fights that I would see happen, to, just ignorance, like la 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 la, I'm not going to pay attention to this thing that's happening that could be really detrimental for me or my relationship. How many of us are unable to authentically connect because of our dogmatic beliefs that were instilled in us by our faith or our communities? How many of us are suffering under the yoke of toxic masculinity or even toxic femininity? Ooh, I think I even said that right. In the end, those inauthentic ways in which we communicate and relate to each other really end up hurting us in the end, because they cover up what our true needs are. What are our true needs in a relationship? We have a need for security or safety, especially psychological safety in our relationship, not to mention, physical safety is really good value too. We have a need for companionship. And by companionship, I don't mean that codependent, your story is my story, and two shall become one, and we are, we're each other's other half or better half. I'm talking about companionship, being someone who goes along with that journey, but has their own experience and helps keep you steady along the way. We have a need for freedom and autonomy to be able to have make our own decisions and to be able to live our own authentic lives. A lot of times in that two become one, sort of scenario, the way I view it is each one is their own individual wonderful substance, and they come together in this alchemy, in this wonderful cauldron of creation, and they create something entirely new. Every dynamic is its own thing. So having that ability and that autonomy and freedom to express yourself, for example, to express yourself fully in that relationship, to be fully loved for who you actually are instead of who the other person has projected you to be, that itself is such a wonderful feeling. We also have a need for transparency. Transparency helps us understand or helps us assess how safe we feel. It helps us feel like we can trust someone. With our vulnerability, we need to be able to be vulnerable in our relationships as well. That vulnerability often is just seeking acceptance. It's seeking approval. It's seeking a soft place to land. And so if a wrecking ball came through our relationship, it's likely because security, safety, companionship, transparency, expression, vulnerability, acceptance, any of those things were likely the things that were misaligned, that were not being served. Relationships come down for a reason. And sometimes those reasons are actually really, really wonderful. It's actually okay to transform those relationships into something else. In the example that I gave, those two people ended up in the course of that conversation agreeing to have co-parent birthday parties for their kiddo. Despite how she felt about her mom, she wanted to show her mom it can be different. It doesn't have to work out to this resentment that you taught me that I should have toward men or toward my dad or whatever. So there's always room for improvement. There's always room to move forward and to elevate that conversation. So in the end, those relationship wrecking balls, as painful as they are and as traumatic as we will feel them, are actually for our benefit because they make us stronger in asserting who we really are and shining our own brilliant light so that we attract the people who want to provide us with that security, companionship, freedom, autonomy, and who feel that from us as well. We should also be turning the mirror on ourselves and asking, Where have I been preventing these things happening? I mentioned before about guilt for controlling behavior. I carry guilt for controlling behavior that I have enacted in relationships, especially a long-term relationship, long-distance relationship, where I was not feeling very secure. I was feeling very insecure. I was feeling like I could never trust this person and trust what they were telling me. And there were probably good reasons, good red flags why I didn't trust them. And so then I was then cranking up the volume on all these control measures, like, you will call me when you get in, and why did you not tell me about this person? And I started getting more and more and more restrictive because I felt more and more and more threatened. I felt more and more in the dark. So we need to be honest with ourselves in particular about what limiting beliefs that we have, because at the core of that was a limiting belief that I am disposable. And I know for a fact that there will never be anyone like me in this person's life ever again. So that does not make me disposable. So I had to deal with that self-limiting belief of being disposable in order to reframe that whole wrecking ball that came through my life and understand that I don't need to have these controlling behaviors in order to feel secure. That if I'm not feeling secure, maybe it's time to leave the relationship. And so that's how we learn. That's how we grow. That's how we develop. Wrecking balls are going to continue to happen, especially when we are in misalignment with our authentic, real, beautiful, sparkling selves. So don't be so afraid of picking up the pieces after that, because you're going to find so much beauty and so much forgiveness and so much grace in the course of that rebuilding scenario, that it is worth it. You are going to be feeling more secure in yourself. You'll feel more secure in relationships if you can help identify where those places were misaligned, and thus why the wrecking ball had to come through. Because remember, we're always given some amount of notice before this happens. And every now and then, even when we're not, we can sense something in the air. And so when we rebuild, we then are better able to anticipate when these things are happening, so that we can say, oh, you're right, the foundations are really weak. Let me go fix that. So that we can listen to those messages when they come up the first time, rather than having to have a clue by 4 to the head. So with that said, I want to help us get better with our relationships. I want us to feel stronger and more secure in our relationships. And so that's why I'm also offering a Trauma-Informed Care 101 class on May 12th. I keep wanting to say May 2nd. May 12th at 1 p.m. It's going to be online. It's a 90-minute class. We are going to be covering a lot of material. I'm going to try to keep it as non-triggery as possible. But we're talking about trauma. And we're going to be talking about relationship trauma, and hopefully identifying some ways that in your relationships you can turn on the volume for that empathy and create some space for your partners to be their true and authentic selves, and for you to feel secure in doing that as well. And that includes making space and room for our trauma, our experience of trauma, and other people's experiences of trauma too. So please join me for that. There's a link at the bottom. It's only going to be $10. And I want you to talk to me about your relationship wrecking balls. What did you learn after those things happen? I want to hear from you. I love learning from the people that I work with. And so I want to hear your ideas as well. So drop a comment, share. I'm very sorry that this went over, but I appreciate you being here and sticking with me. Take care and have a wonderful week.